Dead Space is a nightmare set amongst the stars. As someone who's always gravitated towards the horror genre, specifically its sci-fi and cosmic variants, Dead Space had very little resistance, captivating my attention and quickly becoming one of my favourite games. My history and interest in horror started as a simple attempt to seek out media that scared me, but over time, it turned into a genuine curiosity towards the craft behind it. Part of the reason why is Dead Space. I believe this game is one of the best examples of how to translate the existential dread of a spacefaring future into an interactive experience, where the scariest moments are the ones you are in control of. It's also a game that draws inspiration from numerous sources and combines them to forge its own unique identity. This video is therefore a love letter to Dead Space, to the ingenuity of Visceral Games' original iteration and EA Motive's ability to faithfully recreate it.
Imagine 6 months staring at that chunk of rock.
The star of the show is the setting. Similar to BioShock, Dead Space traps the player within a single location, the USG Ishimura. And just like how the Art Deco-themed underwater city of Rapture became synonymous with BioShock, the Ishimura's design significantly contributes to Dead Space's distinctive identity. Throughout a prolonged time spent solely navigating this location, the player builds up a sense of familiarity. If you're like myself and a fan of the series, you probably share my strange sentimental attachment to this haunted house in space. At first, I found it difficult to articulate why, as the Ishimura is not a pleasant setting. The 62-year-old planet cracker is a hulking spaceship that casts a colossal shadow over the nearby planet, Aegis 7. Inside, it's a labyrinth of narrow corridors flanked by decaying walls and flickering lights. It's cold, claustrophobic, and uninviting. And yet, when EA Motive announced the remake, I was excited to return. Series creator Glenn Schofield cited Event Horizon as the game's visual inspiration, something that can be confirmed by looking at just a single frame of the film. But I can also see notes of Alien, specifically the opening sequence of the original 1979 film, with its establishing shots used to direct us through the Nostromo. And just like the Nostromo, there's beauty to be found in the Ishimura's harsh edges. Built with a focus on practicality over style, with industrial denotations throughout. The metallic uniform of the ship contrasts against its monstrously organic inhabitants, with the juxtaposition between metal and flesh making the Necromorphs feel like parasites infecting a machine host. Despite being claustrophobic and formulaic in structure, the Ishimura does offer variety to aid its personality. The maze of corridors interconnect and give way to more open spaces. These break up the uniformity and emphasize different aspects of Dead Space's design. The medical deck, for example, offers creepily scripted moments early on to show the emotional weight of the Necromorph outbreak on its few remaining survivors. Whether their insanity is a direct effect of the nearby proximity to the malignant marker, the stress-induced psychological damage by the traumatic situation, or perhaps a combination of both, the end result is the same. It's an unsettling place to explore. This is often due to the sudden and intense combat encounters, but there are also unexpected smaller factors, such as the ghostly voices whispering into our protagonist's ears, and the foreboding subtle occurrences that connote both supernatural and psychological horror motifs. A combination that's used to create mystery within the story. raising the question as to whether the Ishimura is haunted or whether our protagonist's sanity is in decline. These minor moments foreshadow the latter, something that would become an important story element of Dead Space's climactic finale and its sequel.
Isaac, can you hear me?
In John Truby's book, The Anatomy of Genres, he explains, "Great horror storytelling pushes the audience into a smaller and smaller box until that box is in the ground. Horror makes us feel what it means to be dead." Dead Space follows this philosophy closely in two key areas. The first is due to the aforementioned setting not remaining static. The Ishimura is gradually decaying and breaking apart. With each story beat, the ship enters further disrepair, testing the engineering limitations of Isaac Clarke and elevating the risks of remaining trapped aboard.
Communications array realigned, ready to transmit.
The box gets smaller and pressurized as we progress, with tension arising from Isaac trying to find new ways to push back whenever possible. The second utilization of Truby's box theory is Isaac himself. Isaac isn't a space marine. He's an everyday character that, despite having a voice in the remake, doesn't possess any strong personality traits. This is intentional as it allows the authored protagonist to be one that's easy to relate to, something that is compounded by the developer's added influence during gameplay, such as the removal of any perceivable HUD, encouraging greater immersion. We even share Isaac's heartbeat, which rapidly pounds at intense moments, almost tricking us into believing it's our own. Stepping into his shoes is therefore done almost subconsciously by the player, thanks to the simpler character framing and the influential design elements. And through our increased alignment to our playable character, the fear of death is subsequently heightened, as whatever is happening to Isaac feels like it's happening to us. Also, just as a side note, I love that EA Motive brought Gunnar right back to reprise his role. I love Dead Space 2, and regardless of whether or not we get a remake of this sequel, playing both games back to back now maintains some continuity with the character's representation. The physical design of Isaac is also striking. The rusty bronze-coloured metal slats of his suit and its illuminated helmet are unique to this universe, but they're also not dissimilar to the colour schemes and design of the USG Ishimura. Pairing this with Isaac's family history surrounding the cult-like religion of Unitology and his relationship with girlfriend Nicole, who was assigned to the mining vessel, makes it feel as though Isaac was always destined to step aboard the Ishimura. It's a great example of the setting feeling intertwined with our protagonist's arc, and their mutual connection to the marker ravaging the insides of both. This simultaneously aids the storytelling of the sequel, with the original game serving as a ground zero event for Isaac's journey, and his memory of the Ishimura being ever present, materializing in terrifying ways. The backstory of Isaac's profession also impacts the gameplay experience.
You know I'm not a nuclear engineer, right?
I don't need you to be. Just stabilize the warhead and eject it away from the Ishimura.
Christ damn it.
No one trained you to carve up monsters with a plasma cutter either. You haven't let us down yet.
As an engineer, his choice of weaponry is unconventional, but as you've probably noticed from the footage, I often resort to using just one weapon from his arsenal, the plasma cutter. This iconic tool is not only perfectly themed around our playable character's engineering roots, but also pairs with Dead Space's Visceral dismemberment system. Switching between vertical and horizontal presets to target specific body parts creates a distinctly unique combat experience. This is another factor that plays heavily into the game's identity, as the dismemberment system itself was conceptualized early on by Glenn Schofield and the team at Visceral Games. Speaking to Ars Technica in an interview series called War Stories, Schofield explained,
"The other rule was we were going to do dismemberment, the thing that we built the game on. So it changed the way that the enemies were designed. It changed the way every single weapon was done, because now they had to be something that could chop off arms and legs.
Whereas typically an enemy's design is created first and their mechanics shortly after, the opposite was true for this system in Dead Space. The limb dismemberment system informed the design of the Necromorphs. This prioritization of the player's experience first and foremost is why the gameplay resonated with so many people. It was built from the ground up to feel impactful in our hands, which simultaneously assisted in EA's decision to greenlight and provide the financial backing to support the original game's development. Schofield and a small team of 18 developers, including himself, were given 6 months to pitch Dead Space to Electronic Arts executives. Rather than use this time to distill the idea behind the game into a cohesive design document, Visceral took a different approach. They created a 15-minute playable segment of the game which acted as a vertical slice of the final product. The experience of playing this short internal demo instantly won the hearts of the publisher, and whilst modernized in the remake, remains largely untouched, its strengths dating back to its 2009 roots. Separate to the plasma cutter, Isaac does possess a wide array of weapons. Due to the limited number of upgrade nodes, I typically like to focus on prioritizing only one other weapon to ensure I can upgrade it in tandem with the cutter. In this recent playthrough, I chose the pulse rifle. Generally speaking, this is one of the weaker options in the game, but I couldn't help but feel satisfied by its punchy and rapid firing, and when upgrading its ammo capacity, it felt reminiscent of the pulse rifle featured in Aliens and Alien Romulus, which I personally found to really elevate the combat experience for me, thanks to my love of this weapon. Designing the dismemberment system first and using it as a core component of Dead Space meant the Necromorphs had to accommodate this, creating some of the most disturbing looking monsters I've seen in a game. Their elongated limbs drawing inspiration from grotesque body horror films like The Thing. And just like the parasitic alien in that film, following a non-conforming anatomy allowed Visceral to push the boundaries of their monster designs to uncomfortable limits, with numerous permutations of the marker's offspring creating a heightened shock factor for players. I'll always remember the first time I defeated a pregnant necromorph, only for its facehugger-like spawn to rush out of the corpse and attack me. The Divider similarly does this, as the name suggests, with its limbs and head separating upon death, acting as a grotesque final stand. The boundless artistic direction of the Necromorph's complex design also results in some of them looking considerably more disturbing the longer you look. For example, on this recent playthrough, I was horrified to discover the tentacle had a nest of shrieking long-tongued faces within its grip, something I'd not noticed before. And despite the increased variety of these horrific designs, the base Necromorphs never lost their frightening appeal, continuously startling me from their ability to pop out of nearby vents or sneak up from behind. The flexibility of the marker's infection also presents opportunities for Resident Evil style bosses. These add set-piece moments within the story to switch up the gameplay and provide a new challenge for players. The Hunter, for example, offers a little bit of that Mr. X and Nemesis brand of terror. Aside from 2 key moments in the story, you cannot kill him and must temporarily dismember his limbs to escape. The Hunter's creation also provides insight into Dead Space's Dr. Frankenstein-like villain, named Mercer.
The slow death. Stasis.
Who serves as the epitome of Unitology's darkest corners. Another notable boss is the Leviathan, a harrowing example to the extent of the marker's influence. Forged from a biomass of colonists and suggested access to food preserves, this massive and disgusting being is also a resilient one. Taking narrative liberty from Ripley in the original Alien, Isaac jettisons the giant monstrosity into space. only to discover its remnants latched back onto the Ishimura.
It's the Leviathan. It must have snagged on the comms array after we spaced it.
A gameplay opportunity for a follow-up encounter, whilst also a suggestion towards the infection's unyielding self-preservation and determination to spread. Dead Space also does this with the supporting character Chen, who quickly succumbs to the Necromorphs during the opening, with the scene of Hammond ejecting his converted monstrous form in an escape pod.
Escape pod 47 launched.
I always forget the importance of this moment, assuming it's just an emotional beat for the narrative, only to later remember this escape pod gets picked up by the USM Valor, a ship that at the time was supposedly answering our SOS beacon and definitely wasn't carrying an atomic warhead. It's one of the methods Dead Space uses to build up our desperation and throw us off course, and due to the numerous times the game does this, when I first played the game I genuinely could not anticipate which method would be our saviour for Isaac to eventually escape the Ishimura.
I never doubted you, Isaac. I knew you'd come back for me.
Are you ready?
In most horror media, the most frightening entities are often the ones we don't see, the kind your mind is encouraged to conjure. Our minds can be a powerful tool that creators can manipulate to elicit fear. Aside from the impressive visuals in Dead Space, the most notable method Visceral and Motive achieve this is through the use of audio. Sound plays an important role in a sci-fi IP's identity. Alien has its whirlwind soundscapes and overworked floppy disks. Star Wars has its iconic blaster sounds and shrieking droids. Dead Space likewise has its own distinct audio cues, such as the sound that plays every time you collect an item, a favourite of mine. But for horror, there's even more. The sound of bursting ventilation pipes and loud faltering machinery populates the Ishimura's halls. For the player, it can become difficult to determine whether or not these noises are a byproduct of the mining vessel's state of disrepair, or a threat lurking around the corner. Keeping us on edge with a heightened sense of tension, and connoting the idea that there are very few safe spaces aboard this ship. And through Dead Space's combination of audio and visual cues, a consistently nerve-wracking atmosphere is produced, encouraging players to move slowly. This deliberate slower pace and anticipation is an important aspect of horror media, one this game excels at. Another key component is the story placed on top of this horrific atmosphere. It's often tempting for creators to design a story which serves as a conveyor belt to take audiences and players from one scare to the next. Dead Space does follow this approach to some degree. It's the purpose of the subplot surrounding the Ishimura's failing systems. This B-story serves the gameplay by directing us towards the next frightening moment or combat encounter, as Isaac carries out various repairs to sections of the ship. However, it's the main story that serves as the emotional heart of Dead Space, the narrative surrounding Isaac, Nicole, and the marker. The game does a great job of setting up the premise under the guise of a simpler structure. On the surface level, this is the story of a man searching for his girlfriend.
Nicole?
Yeah. First deferred from her in weeks.
We're 5 minutes out, you still got that thing on repeat? Guess you really miss her.
I mentioned earlier that Dead Space frames Isaac's character around relatability, ensuring we are aligned with Isaac's goals and desires, with the mystery surrounding Nicole's state and whereabouts being the driving force propelling us forward. After spending many hours in alignment with Isaac, we finally learn the truth. But what's surprising is that we supposedly aren't learning this at the same time as our protagonist.
Nicole's been dead this whole time. You just couldn't handle it, could you? Because if she's gone, At least now it'll be in safe hands. The marker won't turn anyone else into its puppet.
There are two main interpretations for this scene. One in which speculates that Kendra Daniels edited Nicole's final transmission during the opening, which is why Isaac suspected but never knew her fate. The other is the belief that Isaac knew about Nicole's suicide from the very beginning. I can't speak to which one is deemed canon, but there is dialogue in Dead Space 2 which seems to allude to the latter. The idea that he knew the whole time is also my interpretation, and it was a revelation that whiplashed me out of the alignment I'd spent hours immersed in beforehand. So I'm going to base my discussion on this basis. Creating a cohesive story without revealing a plot twist like this is not an easy endeavor. The breadcrumbs a developer leaves need to be subtle enough to make the player feel as though something is amiss, without being too obvious as to why.
Isaac, I lost your rig stream log, like Hammond.
I'm good. I got the SOS beacon. Nicole helped me out.
Nicole's there.
We got separated. She'll find her way back.
She's a trooper, huh?
I think it's safe to say many of us recognized this wasn't Nicole. The glitching terminal screens and lack of rig ID during our calls are clear indicators of this. But this mystery created an expectation that Isaac and I were going to discover the truth of Nicole's death together, not the reveal that he had known the whole time. So few games have created this sort of shock factor, with the most notable being BioShock's iconic "Would you kindly" twist.
Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
The developers implementing so many systems and story elements to encourage us to relate to Isaac, only for us to reach the end and realize we didn't know him as well as we thought, will always be a huge factor in why Dead Space is special to me. I felt betrayed, confused, but also genuinely sympathetic towards Isaac. From a narrative perspective, it gave Isaac a lot more depth than I previously gave him credit for.
Yes. There's only one man I trust now.
He stepped aboard the Ishimura willingly. Upon discovering the horrors inside, he continued to push through to search for Nicole, despite already knowing it was meaningless. Like the Leviathan, he possessed an unyielding resilience to accept defeat. But the foundation of this resilience was denial and the false hope that Nicole was still alive. All of his actions had been in vain. Despite the terrifying monsters aboard the ship, nothing was scarier than facing the truth. The externalized horror didn't overcome the one inside his mind. And the marker preyed on this. Its ability to glean into his psyche and externalize his internal desire is frightening. But I also don't believe it met much resistance from Isaac. His grip on reality was already loosened. The marker just pushed him further.
Isaac, it's me. I wish I could talk to you.
She wanted to talk. I didn't.
I'm sorry.
I can make it right.
I'm sorry
I can save us both.
about everything.
Whilst I originally found this mysterious artifact to play on the cosmic themes of existential dread, it's even more harrowing when you discover it wasn't created by an alien life. Whilst the black markers are from unknown origins, this red variant was reverse engineered by humans, offering that sci-fi horror theme of humanity being the real monsters. My recent playthrough reminded me of why I love Dead Space. There's definitely some subjective bias on my part through my enjoyment of sci-fi horror, but I believe even when removing this that it stands on its own as a great survival horror experience. I also appreciate EA Motive's care in faithfully remaking this game. It's shinier, modernized, and visually stunning. But the core strengths are still the ones that existed in Visceral's original release back in 2009. What are your thoughts on Dead Space, and do you want to see the sequel receive the same remake treatment? Feel free to let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, you're more than welcome to subscribe to the channel as there's plenty more on the way. And thank you for watching. Whether you're already a subscriber or a new viewer stopping by, I really appreciate you making it to the end. It means a lot, and I do hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I'll see you later.
From the CECD Ishimura USG, she cracked a moon with gravity. Go me bully boy go, huh? Soon may the Cardian come to save our souls and take us home. One day when the fixing is done, we'll take our leave and go. 3 years she served her tour, 30 planets cracked and more. The captain called no fly and swore he'd take that mucker in tow. Huh?